Yeah, so in 2020, we know there were so many things going on that year. I was
Yeah.
especially moved by Breonna Taylor and what happened to her.
Mm.
Specifically, the fact that we found out nationally that it had taken months for us to get the news, and then also once we did see a actual police report come out and talk about what her injuries were, they said none. And
Mm.
I was really struck by the fact that we were celebrating so much of her life in a way where her illustrations were on magazine covers and, everybody was talking about her. And I thought, what would it be like, though, if we actually remembered people right now, not just when they're
Mm.
gone? And it really brought me to this place of thinking of Black women and how we oftentimes do so much work and we aren't remembered right now before we're gone. And so it really made me want to talk about it more and to celebrate healing and life with sisters is just so important.
It's amazing that as you say this, I'm right now seeing in one of the chat groups for the show, someone reminding us that most of the people who were active in the civil rights movement, who were supporting Martin Luther King Jr., were Black women. They are, we know, the backbone of most of our religious institutions. Without Black women in the church, ain't no church. Don't care if you got the pastor. You ain't got no Black women, you ain't got a church. And so we have seen the power of Black women on display in a variety of ways. And yet, when it comes to talking about wholeness for Black women, when it comes to talking about wellness, this is something that I think is a newer conversation for Black women to have, particularly because centering self-care is a part of a fresher and newer conversation that Black women are having. Talk with us about the importance, as you see it, for us to be open to the idea of wholeness and wellness as being two parts of one unique unit.
Yeah. So, I think there were so many activists, especially during 2020, everybody's educating and advocating and doing all of this work. And what I saw with myself and other Black women who were doing a lot of education work and community organizing was that people were getting burnt out. They were tired,
Mm.
mentally and physically exhausted, and really didn't have space to just rest, to just be. And I really think it's important for us to find our space to say no, even if it is something
Mm.
good. There's things within the movement that can continue without us, and we can take a break. Oftentimes, we feel like
Yeah.
we can't take a break because we really don't have a break from racism, right? But at the same
Mm.
time, if we're not healthy, if we're not whole, if we aren't embodying what we're fighting for, then we really won't have longevity in this work. And I think that's the most important thing is how can I see my sisters live full, whole, and healthy lives?
Mm.
Yeah, I have always loved writing letters. Back when there was Zanga and MySpace or Tumblr, I was always doing something on social media writing. And at one point, I
Mm.
had a blog called Lyrics and Letters. And so when I thought about this book and what I wanted to share, I've always felt like I convey my words the best if I write them down in a letter. And I
Mm.
wanted my sisters to feel like we're just sitting down and having coffee. And all of these letters were birthed from different phases in my life. And I wanted to say words I wished that I could hear. It was
Mm.
also conversations that I had with my friends over the years, different issues that were like hot topics for us. And I really turned those into letters and just writing the words that we either said to each other, moments that I've pondered to myself, a lot of journaling moments, and just really turned it into something to where I wanted to people to feel seen in every chapter,
Mm.
in every phase of their life. I wanted to be able to write something where people said, wow, yes, that's me. And I
Mm.
needed to read that.
So do you think sisterhood is so important for us? And we've been talking about sisterhood a lot this year, literally the first 2 weeks. We've been talking about sisterhood a lot as it compares to sisterhood as a function for healing, sisterhood as a space that allows for us to heal in ways that if you don't have access to, like you can't, right? Like there was a time a couple of years ago when the military was first deciding what they were going to do with hair regulations for Black women. They were also studying at that time the role of Black women soldiers who participated in these sister circles. And they weren't just doing it because it's this unique thing that Black women do. They were studying this because they thought that perhaps there's something about the sister circle function that served as a suicide prevention preventative, as a self-harm preventative, because there's so much healing in that space. How do you think that we have come to recognize the value of sister circles in the way that we do? And what role do you think that they could play if this practice of gathering, in only the way that Black women do, were something that Black men would be more willing to embrace, and that people who are not even within the Black community, that role of the gathering space where we hold each other accountable, show each other the love that we need, build each other up when we are hurting. Talk with us about that role itself as a healing mechanism, or a healing modality, I think some might say.
Yeah, I think that even myself, when I write about these points of pain within the book, I did not heal alone. I did not traverse through the hardest parts of my life without community. I couldn't have done it. And the reason is that there were some people at times when I just did not have what I needed. Some of my sisters had what I needed, and they showed up. Whether that was, I'm moving away, I'm packing my house, I have so much to do, I don't know where to start, and my sisters came over. My friend came over on Mother's Day with her 3 girls and still helped me pack. Another friend came over another day with dinner and helped me get things together and said, I'm not even going to ask you what you need. I'm just going to show up because I know you need it and you might not tell me. And I feel like when you have a community, a sisterhood, it's really people who see you, love you, and are willing to hold you accountable, but also show up when even if you don't say anything, they know how to be there. And it takes time to cultivate those relationships, but it's so important because life is tough. We all go through hard things, and we need people beside us to pick us up. And I truly believe that during this time in society, we as Black women need each other more than ever. And I just think it's really important for us to stick together rather than, do anything that would divide us or tear us apart. We need each other.
As I'm hearing you talk, I'm reminded of this story that a friend of mine just shared about a friend that she had, another person who was going through a very tough time. We know at the beginning of the year, everyone was like, check on your tough friends and, check on your strong friends. And those of us who are the strong friend are like, y'all never check on us. What you doing now? So it was sort of like this, sort of a social media meme. And a lot of that came out of news about recent incidents where people had died by suicide. And so this idea of checking on your strong friends, this friend that she's telling me about ends up, moving into a new place. Their parent had just died. So they're in the midst of this depression, and they had friends who would call and be like, hey girl, I'm checking on you. And then be like, yeah, I'm fine, whatever. Hang up the phone. Hey girl, I'm checking on you. Just trying to make sure you're okay. Hang up the phone. And so eventually one of the friends found out she hadn't unpacked. And so a slew of them come to her house, and they just sort of bum rush the house. They're like, yeah, you said you was fine. We know you ain't fine. Let's unpack all this stuff. We're going to get you set up. And within a couple of hours, they had, just by the act of merely showing up and being there for her in an activation of the sister circle, allowed her not only to get her apartment unpacked, but just gave her access to breathe and gave her the ability to find a sense of rest. As you mentioned at the very beginning, you have as the last chapter, Reclaiming Me, a letter to my sister who's ready to reclaim her life. Talk to us about the importance of that sort of reclamation and why it is that you think more Black women should be engaged in the process of reclaiming who we actually are.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I gave myself so much freedom just to be who I needed to be to me and not who everybody else needed me to be to them.
What does that mean? Talk to us about that.
Yeah. So, I am one of those strong friends, and people would oftentimes look to me to either help with something, fix something, come to me for their problems. And I just gave myself permission to not be that person anymore. I didn't have the time and space in that way to do it. And so there's some seasons of life where I've had more margin to be that person for people. And I've had others where I just don't have the margin. And I would struggle with saying no. I would struggle with not showing up for people, even if I was exhausted, even if I was emotionally not in a good place. I was still doing things for everybody else. But it wasn't until I fell apart my own self in a big way that I realized, you know what, had I been taking care of myself, had I been saying no, had I chosen myself instead of saying, okay, yeah, I'll do this for you, or I'll take on that extra project at work, or I'll work till, midnight or whatever, then I wouldn't have been in the position that I was in. So in order to reclaim myself, I had to take extreme measures because my personality type, I'm going to be there for you. I'm going to do it all. And I just had to realize that if I want to live a happy, full, and fulfilled life, I
Mm.
have to take up space for myself. I have to be okay with me laying down. I have to be okay with myself finding rest. And it's not just about getting sleep, it's also about like internal and mental rest. And so I wanted to end the book with talking about reclaiming because we've all lost something along the way. And we
Mm.
know that there is something we need to get back. And all of us know within us, what is that one thing or that two or three things that we've lost that I need to refine so I can show up as the woman that I'm supposed to be? And that's what I want to encourage people with. You don't have to be everything to everyone. Still find
Mm.
time to love you and to show up for you. There's nothing selfish about loving yourself.
Can
And
we
that's what I
sit
want
there
to,
for a minute?
yeah.
Let's sit in that space for a minute. There's nothing selfish about loving yourself. And I'm asking because, you use the phrase take up space for me. And there's a concept that I've talked about with my audience before where, the flower doesn't ask for their fair share of the sun. The tree is not asking for its fair share of the air, the water, the resources. And yet it feels like part of being the strong Black woman or the strong Black man, particularly for the strong Black woman, because I'm speaking for my own personal need in this conversation at this particular moment. This idea of taking up space for ourselves seems violative of like community agreements, right? Like we don't mind taking up space for others. We will show up if someone calls us and needs us to wield, the sword and the shield, we will come in arms at the ready, hands on hips, legs askance, ready to take on the mountain on behalf of other people. And yet when it comes to doing that same thing for ourselves, often we're not engaging in that in the same way. Can you just give us some insight from your experience, how you were able to go from being perfectly willing to take up space on behalf of other people to then using that skill to take up space on your own? How did you get your start?
Yeah, so there's a few different things that I did, but one thing is I let go of all of my extra commitments. So if there was
Oh.
commitments that I had like outside of work, and yeah, mostly anything outside of work, I let it go. I wasn't doing
Huh.
it. So that meant like if it was extra volunteering, extra whatever, anything that was taking up my time, I let it go. The other thing I did was I realized that I didn't sit with myself enough in silence. I didn't really know how to, engage with my own breath. So taking moments for quiet space, meditation, just
Mm.
giving myself space to think without distraction is the really important thing, I would say. And the other thing was
I
just
love that.
learning how to not feel bad for saying no. I still sometimes struggle with it, but I will say no if I know it's not going to serve me, if I know I can't do it, I'll say no. And I know that it's the best thing that I could do for myself because I started to say, you know what, would you rather say no up front rather than go to something you really don't want to be at or do something you really don't care to do, and then you're just frustrated that you have to do it? And I was just tired of that feeling. I had years of feeling like that. And when
Mm.
I set myself free, it's like no turning back. I'm so much happier now.
This part about letting go of commitments, part of me is like, yes, let it go. And then the other part's like, girl, who gonna do it if you don't do it? And that's sort of the crux of it, right? Like that you have to decide. We had in our moment of gratitude this morning, I love that you said sitting with yourself in the silence, because every day we do a moment of gratitude where we find some point of inspiration. And it's really, ideally our moment of gratitude would be silent meditation, but you can't do dead air on the radio. So instead we do an active sort of thing where we'll find, I find something for us to focus on, something that is inspirational. But you said sitting with yourself in silence with your own breath and thinking freely. And I gotta be honest with you, Faith, I don't feel like we spend a whole lot of time comfortably carving out space just to think. One of the things I had said a couple of weeks ago was that I need you to schedule some daydreaming time in your calendar. Like whatever you're doing, if you have a full calendar, that's great. Every single day should have a good 5 to 10, I'm gonna say 15 to 20 minutes where you are daydreaming, where you are thinking imaginative thoughts. You're imagining something being as wonderful and beautiful, as amazing as it possibly could be. There is a real power with sitting in that silence. Can you just tease out for us a little bit as to what that act in particular was able to do for you?
Yeah, I think, there's so many things that my mind gets cluttered with because I am a
Mm.
doer and I want to see it all get done and I want it done as quickly as possible. And so
Yep.
having that space to just be and to just think, it helped to reignite my creativity. So as a writer and a creator, I loved, creating new things and trying new things. But I realized if I'm only consuming constantly, if I'm only consuming content, consuming, I'm really
Mm.
not able to sit with myself to see what's within me that needs to come out. What do I need to share? What do I have within me that needs
Mm.
to rise to the top? And that might feel like something somebody else might get something from, or I can share what I'm learning. But I can't do that if I'm only listening to everyone else's voices. So I really had to make space to just craft what it looks like for me internally to say, you know
Mm.
what? There's some good things inside of me right now. Let me write that down because I have the space to. Let me, share this with a friend. Let me make a voice note. Let me capture this moment really quickly. And I can look back and see how so many of my words and different things that even words that got on this page are from moments where I was just making space to be quiet and to
Wow.
be still so creativity could come forth.